So I think the biggest issue that's going to come out of the post-COVID era, and think about like a meatpacking facility
Mhm.
in the United States or anywhere else in the world, it requires a lot of human intervention. There are a lot of employees there. But to be fair, there are companies in Japan and in China that can create robots, right? I don't mean humanoid robots, but I mean just like robotic arms and stuff that can perform those tasks for free. And those new employees that are automated, they never get sick, they never take a day off, they can do double shifts. There's no concept of that. As long as they have the fuel and the electricity to work, they're going to be able to do that. And I think that COVID is accelerating a lot of different things, and that's going to be one of the things that it accelerates, because businesses are going to realize, I don't need humans here. But then what happens to all of those humans? And I think this is going to be a gigantic problem. The United States is a perfect example of this.
Good morning, sir. How are you? I am so glad to finally have you on the podcast, and welcome to the Mitti Ke Rang podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your patience as well. There's been a little bit of back and forth, most of it my fault, so I really appreciate your patience.
Right. We wanted to keep it as the first thing in the morning so we can put all our energies in the podcast.
Yeah, nobody wants to see me at the end of the day, to be fair.
You're actually looking pretty good this morning, having your caffeine shot for the day.
Fair enough. And we have an agreement, right?
About?
You're not going to call me sir.
Yes. Okay, Michael. That sounds great.
Awesome.
So, in the next 30 to 40 minutes, what I want to talk to you about is growth and business strategies and the way people perceive social ventures and all about everything in between.
Okay, go ahead. Where do you want me to start?
Well, so the first thing that I would want to know is, what is growth according to you? What exactly is growth? People perceive growth as different meanings, different things all the time. What is it to you?
So to me, there are multiple ways you can define growth, right? You can have P&L growth, you can have employee growth, you can have community growth, and you can also have career growth. And I think trying to combine all of those four things together, plus social impact growth, right? I think this is really important. And I think there's been a secular change. You see, I do a podcast called the Social Innovation Podcast. And one of the reasons why I started doing it was because I was introduced to this concept about a year and a half or 2 years ago, that you can run a business that's profitable and still have impact without ruining the environment, without ruining the local communities. That these things end up being really important. It actually ends up being more sustainable. And if you go back and look at the UNDP's sustainability goals, having not a social enterprise, right, but a business that is focused on social impact as well, having social impact growth is something I think that's really important. So it can be defined in many ways.
Right. So all this time, growth strategies vary depending on different factors, be it time and be it the audience the company wants to capture. So what is that one growth strategy you found the best? Like just an example of a company that you find is doing crazy in terms of growth.
So I don't think there's a silver bullet for any kind of growth. And frankly, I don't think there's a silver bullet for any particular type of company either. What I would say, though, is that the best companies iterate really quickly, and that they try to test strategies around what their target audience is, right? So do you have a local audience? Do you have a regional audience? Do you have a super regional audience, right? So are you talking about Bangkok, Thailand? Are you talking about all of Thailand? Are you talking about the three countries surrounding Thailand? So Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, right? Throw Myanmar in there as well. Or are you talking about all of Southeast Asia, all of Asia, or globally? And all of these things matter when you're trying to determine like what your growth strategy is. But I think, and there are two schools of thought on this, right? One is get as big as you can, as fast as you can. And the other is dominate one market as fast as you possibly can and learn as much as you can about how to grow there, and then try to extrapolate what the other similar markets are like that, right? So what you learn in Bangkok is not going to be the same, and you're not going to have the same strategy as what you have in Singapore, just because everything about those two places are different. But what you learn in Bangkok may help you in Ho Chi Minh City, and also may help you in Jakarta, because there are similarities there. The idea is try to have a business idea, right? And we can pick one, pick any one you want. Like there's a great company in Thailand called QQ. It's about how can you disintermediate waiting in line? Like, why should I stand in line at the bank for 35 minutes when I can just get a queue number via a mobile phone and then go about some other business that I have, get notified, then go back to the bank and take care of that. Now, you may find that in Singapore, the lines aren't as long. So maybe there's a better way to do that. But as you expand into other markets, there are ways to figure out how your product or your business can properly grow in those places, but it's almost always going to be different.
Absolutely. Like, if we talk in terms of considering the strategies adopted by Apple, so I was recently watching a video why Apple failed in India. And apart from all
Okay.
the factors they stated, I had this comment in the comment section which I read, which said Apple failed in India because Indians have more than 2 brain cells.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean you talk about Apple, the iPad, the iPhone, the computer maker? Yeah.
Yes, and it's also because Apple is definitely expensive in India, and we also have many companies. Like the major reason I think Apple failed in India because of is OnePlus. So OnePlus has this huge creative interface, and obviously Indians prefer Android over the software that is offered by Apple.
Right. So you actually make a really good point. I would say, I would posit actually that Apple didn't fail in India necessarily because the interface was bad or because the interface was slow. I would say that there was a cost performance problem. And that is Android as an operating system ends up being much cheaper to implement. And there are two ways to do it. The names I don't remember, right? But like the OnePlus you said uses Android. If they use all the Google services, it's going to be a little bit more expensive because they have to pay for it. If they don't, they can build their own skins and their own operating systems on top of it or user interface on top of it. But the big problem is that the GDP per capita in India, in specific places, right, not in the major cities, but in specific places, is much lower than Apple's target market.
Absolutely.
And the other thing about Apple, and this has changed recently, right, particularly in India, is that India prefers to have products made inside the country. And most of the iPhones and the iPads and Apple stuff gets made where? It gets made in Shenzhen or somewhere in China, right? And then gets exported into India. But recently, Apple has signed an agreement to start building iPhones and their products in India as well. And this should marginally lower the price points for those phones. And remember, India as a country for the past 25, 30, even 40 years has bit by bit become wealthier and wealthier. And that's a secular trend, frankly, it's not going to change. So as a strategy and as a growth strategy, I think what Apple's saying is we're making a long-term bet that the GDP per capita gap between Western, more wealthy countries and India is going to close. That India is going to close that gap, right? And that's been happening anyway. And as that does happen, Apple wants to be there and become a premium brand in the same way that BMW is a premium brand. Everybody can't own one, but everybody kind of wants to own one. And I think as a growth strategy, that's not a bad idea. And what will happen is that companies like OnePlus and Huawei will find out that, sure, as like an introductory model, people will get their phones. But the same way people want to have like a Louis Vuitton bag, they're going to want an Apple phone for status, maybe only for status. But that's unknown yet in India, right? But as the GDP per capita increases, I think that as a strategy, being there anyway is a good idea. What do you think?
I think absolutely there has been this wave of people wanting to buy Indian products, especially now that the COVID-19 has unleashed a whole new era. So we also have this campaign running by the government, Vocal for Local, which says buy products which are made in your country. So of course that is a factor, but this factor is something which hasn't always been there. So India started off after the independence. We started off with a pretty uh, market that was also exposed to the trade of other countries, but also which was protected. So we started off in that way.
Yeah, and look, developing countries sometimes do that. I mean, Japan did it for a long time. Thailand has done it for a while. And as you get wealthier and wealthier, and as your economy becomes stronger and stronger and more robust, meaning not just reliant on exports. And India, frankly, has done a really good job of this, right? If you look at the difference between the Indian economy and the Chinese economy, decisions were made, whether actively or passively, about both countries from governments and from sort of associations there, right? The Chinese said, we want to be a manufacturing economy. We want to manufacture everything. And the Indian government said, we want to be a knowledge economy, right? The IIT system does this, and you started off with Tata Consultancies and a whole bunch of other companies like that that said we want to be the knowledge economy, right? So there were not a lot of things that were manufactured there that were then exported to the rest of the world, but knowledge was manufactured there and exported to the rest of the world, right? And that was the
Absolutely.
bet that the government made, and that was their strategy for growth. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Like also the pharmacy sector, India being the pharmacy of the world. So 96% of the vaccine being imported from India to other countries, whereas the API, that are the raw material for manufacturing the vaccines, are from China. So we are
Right.
dependent in many ways on our neighbors, but we are with the current policies and everything, we're trying to change that status and build in more R&D in India so that we can manufacture our own stuff and goods.
Yeah, and I mean it makes sense, right? Not just in India and China as well. But again, as the population gets wealthier, they get more educated by definition. And once you get everybody to become more educated, an educated population is a highly economic population as well, right? And a highly motivated population. And what that means, and again, one of the differences between the Indian economy and the Chinese economy is that there's friction, meaning between what the Chinese make and then get shipped to other places. It's a physical good, right? So to move it from one place to another place, there's friction. But if you have a knowledge economy, then there's really no friction. There's just bits and bytes getting shipped around the world, and maybe some phone conversations or some Zoom calls. Now that's changing over time, right? And I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about the Chinese policy of what is it called, the One Belt, One Road,
Right.
because that'll just bring us down a completely different track. But from a growth perspective, I think both of these strategies make a certain amount of sense, depending on what your focus is, right?
Absolutely. So the next piece of conversation being like some companies start off great and they have great strategies, but they eventually fade with time. So what is that? What is that one thing or the couple of things which make a company sustainable through all times?
So the whole idea there is, like I said, iteration and change. I mean, and let's use Apple as the perfect example of this, right? And also keeping your eye on what the rest of the market is doing and never feeling complacent. And also, I spoke to somebody yesterday about this. This whole idea of like Six Sigma requires you to constantly be evaluating your business. And if you're constantly evaluating it and looking outside for ideas and then bringing those ideas in, it's the best way to work. And let's use Apple as the perfect example. The iPod was this sort of transformational device. And this is a long time ago now, right? What was it? 2004, 2005? I can't remember anymore. It was a long time ago. But they looked at that device and said, we're going to make a ton of money on this, but someone's going to come up with a software solution for this. And if we don't do that, it's going to cannibalize us. Let's cannibalize ourselves. Let's take the risk. Let's be strong enough to understand that this is just an interim product. And then let's turn that into software, put it on the iPhone and the iPad. And their iPod business now is almost meaningless, but their iPhone business is now one of the single biggest businesses in the world. So the idea is, if you want to sustain your business, always be willing to change. And again, I was talking to this guy yesterday from Unifor Systems, really smart guy. And one of the things he said was, no, from Allianz, from Bajaj Allianz, yeah, in India. And one of the things he said to me was, it used to be you wanted to know it all. But the idea today is you want to learn it all. And if you're not constantly learning about what's going on, not just internally, but externally, you're not going to have a sustainable business, and someone's just going to come along and blow you away. And let's look at the reverse example of this. Kodak and even Fujifilm, right? So both of these made film, physical film, and cameras, and they made a lot of money off of them. And actually, Kodak was one of the first inventors and patenters of digital cameras, but they didn't want to cannibalize their film business, which also, remember, is a chemical business. Like Kodak is originally a chemical company, yeah? Just like Fuji is. So, and now they're focused almost entirely on that. But their film business completely went away, and everybody else disintermediated them by building digital cameras. It's a simplification, obviously, of what happened, but that's the thing of which you have to be careful. What are the things you have internally? Should you cannibalize yourself? Because if you don't, you know somebody else will. You cannot take that that transformational invention that you have and put it in a closet somewhere and lock the door and hope nobody finds out. Right? And that's what Kodak did, and that's what almost killed them.
Absolutely. Also, I think Netflix did great in terms of sustainability, like being from a DVD distributor, I think, and how they went on digital. And this asked, they were I would say sustainable and something that was people's favorite throughout times.
Okay, let's go through the Netflix story for a second. When Netflix, and remember, there's nothing that says DVD in their name, right? There's nothing that says red boxes. There's nothing that says kiosks. It's just net, on the internet, Flix, movies, whatever you want to do, right? Flix is just sort of a colloquial term for a movie or anything that you're going to watch that's video, right? And when Reed Hastings, I believe, started this company, he already had a vision for doing streaming on the internet, but the bandwidth wasn't there yet. But he did think that there was a way to use the internet to get people used to ordering movies over the internet and TV series. So they set up a way to order online, go pick up these things at malls and other places like that, at kiosks. And frankly, Blockbuster and some of the other big video rental companies in America saw it and said, don't care. Just don't care. That's definitely going to fail. No one's going to order that way. People want to come into a physical store, pick up that VHS tape or the DVD, and then take it home with them. And then Netflix just looked at them, shrugged their shoulders, and kept going, but always with a vision to build that online streaming business, which is the one that they have today. But what's more interesting about that is that as they continued to grow and as they continued to iterate and test the bandwidth, which they were doing from the beginning, once the bandwidth hit a tipping point, and it was possible then to start doing it online, they kept both of those businesses for a short period of time. But what they realized, and here's where really innovative companies excel, is what they realized is that the physical distribution system, right, and the logistics around getting DVDs all over the place to people physically was a very different skill set than what was necessary to run a digital distribution business. It's very subtle, right? But you have to understand this. So their sustainability, or part of it, came from the fact that the top line management at Netflix said, we love you guys and gals that are running that logistics business to do that, but you're just not qualified to run a digital distribution business. So we're going to spin all of you out and we're going to bring in brand new management to do digital distribution because it's an entirely, completely different skill set. That's hard to do as a manager because these people are all your friends. They were there from the beginning. They help you build that business and make it robust, but now they're gone. And that's really hard to do. So that's also, management has to be able to make decisions. There's a concept that was taught to me really early on when I was in college, and that is you can either live life or let life live you. And the idea is if you don't make a decision, and this is true in business as well, if you don't make a decision, that decision is going to get made for you. And not making a decision is actually a decision in and of itself. And great managements make decisions for better or for worse. But at least then they can live up to it, themselves, right? And they can take a responsibility for it. But when they stop taking responsibility for what happens, those companies are not going to be sustainable.
Absolutely. I think remodeling is hard in terms of laying off, and especially those people who've always been there and been there from the starting where you built it from the scratch. Absolutely, you're right.
It's hard work, right?
Yeah.
And again, I don't want anyone to be out of a job. That's not the idea. It's not about being Machiavellian. And we talked about this earlier, right? If you want to run a socially responsible enterprise, you're not happy when you have to let people go. You're not happy when you spin out underperforming assets. But you have to find a balance, right? So in the old days, they would teach you when you get an MBA, it's a profit motive only, right? But the idea is you should think, I think, when you're running a business is, are there people within that organization or within that division that we're going to spin out that we can keep inside the business because of customer service or any of the other things that they're doing? Because we don't want to lay off people just to raise our profits, right? Because we talked about this. The idea is that, are you talking about community growth? Are you talking about social innovation growth? And if you are, and having impact, then part of your impact on the community is employing the people in the communities where you have business. And that actually is becoming much more important, I think. So it's not profit motive just for pure profit anymore. That's what I think. Anyway, go ahead. I interrupted you again.
Which also brings me to the way people perceive social ventures. So there's this whole disparity or difference between people perceiving a company or an MNC or an organization or any venture versus a social venture. So for example, which I talk about is if a company injects money or injects funds into advertisements, it is seen as a long-term growth strategy or something that which brings in revenue and profit. But whereas if a social venture injects money for advertisements, for say a fundraiser, it is not viewed as the same positive mindset or um, the just the mindset which people view the company injecting money.
So I'd actually like to, I think words matter. And I would like to actually change some terminology. I don't think you should call these businesses like social, what did you call them? Social
Social
responsible
ventures.
business? Yeah, social ventures. I think you should just call them ventures, right? And the idea is you remove the only motive for growing those companies as profit. Think about this. Think about it this way. I like to eliminate externalities, right? So let's say you live in a one community world,
Mhm.
right? And 1,000 people live in that community, and there's one business in that community, maybe two, right? Because everybody has to eat. Theoretically, part of your role in that community is to employ as many people as you possibly can. The more profit you make, the more people you can employ. So for any venture, you want to be as profitable as possible so that you can then employ more people, right? Not just so you can then take that money and have the income so bifurcated that you are succeeding, but the rest of your community is failing. And you can talk about that community, like I said earlier, hyper local, local, regional, super regional, or global. But why is that the case? Why would you want to be in a business that's not just maximizing profit for profit's sake and keeping all the profits themselves? I like to say this. Do you want to live in a community where the people that take all the profit have to walk over dead people in the street because that they were not distributing the success of those businesses to the entire community? Not really. I don't think everybody wants to live in fear behind a gated wall and then have to drive around in armored cars. And to be fair, there's no excuse for having income inequality in a way that's so bifurcated that the people around you are suffering and you're not. Right. So that's what I mean when I say giving back to the community. And we don't need to call it social ventures because, frankly, if every business did that, there would be no such thing as a social venture. Everything would just be a venture. And if you live in a world like that, which I don't think is impossible, then the benefits accrue to everybody in that community or everybody in that society. And that seems to me to be a better way to live and a better way to grow as well, right? Because remember, those people that are living in poverty or without resources are also potential clients for you.
Absolutely.
And if you can employ them or give them slightly more resources, they'll buy your product just because they like you. And I think this is one of the growth things that people have forgotten about.
Absolutely. You offered a great perspective there. So, just talking about these unprecedented times we are in, all the strategies will vary once we come out of the COVID-19 times. So, how do you think what will be more appealing to the consumers or the audience in the post-COVID era?
So I think the biggest issue that's going to come out of the post-COVID era, and think about like a meatpacking facility
Mhm.
in the United States or anywhere else in the world, it requires a lot of human intervention. There are a lot of employees there. But to be fair, there are companies in Japan and in China that can create robots, right? I don't mean humanoid robots, but I mean just like robotic arms and stuff that can perform those tasks for free. And those new employees that are automated, they never get sick, they never take a day off, they can do double shifts. There's no concept of that. As long as they have the fuel and the electricity to work, they're going to be able to do that. And I think that COVID is accelerating a lot of different things, and that's going to be one of the things that accelerates because businesses are going to realize I don't need humans here. But then what happens to all of those humans? And I think this is going to be a gigantic problem. The United States is a perfect example of this. One of the things that people don't understand is that there aren't a lot of jobs. There are jobs that are moving offshore, but one of the biggest problems is not offshoring, it's automation, right? And once you start automating processes, you never go back to unautomating them, if that's a word. What happens again? It gets back to this idea of community. What is your venture really there for? Is it just to maximize profit for you and to let the rest of the people die? And I think one of the things you're going to see come out of this is the realization that, as radical as it may have seemed even just a year ago, something like UBI, Universal Basic Income, because it's going to happen in every country. And it may actually happen in countries like China and India before it happens elsewhere, because there's still a large gap of people that need to be employed, that need to come out of poverty, which China's done a very good job of doing actually, in India as well. But because automation is now possible when it wasn't possible 20 years ago at that scale, people are going to have to think about wait a second, there's all this profit being generated and it's highly concentrated. The people that are capturing those profits and the companies that are capturing them are highly concentrated. Is everybody else just going to die? Is that where we really want to live? So it's accelerating in two ways. One is automation is going to be accelerated because people are afraid of the virus. This is not the last virus that's going to happen. And whether it's going to become more common or not, we don't know. But what companies will figure out, just like they did in the auto industry, is that if I can automate the process of building something or creating something, I can do that at scale, and it's going to lower my costs and increase my margins. But what do we do with those margins? That's the real question I think that's going to come out of this. And I think you're going to see governments globally have been promising, we're going to bring your jobs back. We want to put you back in a coal mine. Nobody wants to do that job, right? But how are you going to eat? And I think that this concept of UBI is something that's really going to come out of this COVID era, because I don't think COVID's going to be done in the next 6 months. I mean, what's the status in India? Are you guys still in lockdown?
Yes, we are. Actually, we had the most strict lockdown over here, and I am
Yeah,
5 months in, and I haven't stepped out since 5 months, and it's the sixth
right.
month going on. So it's pretty horrible here.
Yeah, it's really bad, but think about it. India is a large contributor to the global economy and should continue to grow. We've already talked about that. In Thailand, I self-quarantined for 2.5 months. And, now I'm sitting in an office somewhere. I took a taxi here today, but I was wearing a mask. The taxi driver was wearing a mask. And while the Thai economy has been hit pretty hard, there aren't 30 million people unemployed here like there are in the United States.
Okay.
Yeah,
So yes, COVID has definitely been a tough time. Whereas, if I talk about AI and the automation you just talked about, you do believe
right.
it will kill jobs, and it will be a bit threatening for us humans, and especially the non-skilled workers.
So I think there are a lot of issues with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and not the least of which is that, excuse me, all of the programming that gets done by humans for now. So why is that a problem? Show me a human that says they don't have a bias, and I'll show you a human that has no self-awareness. And when those biases could be good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. And they may not be purposeful. In other words, someone may not say, I'm going to program this artificial intelligence so that it purposely discriminates against some kind of category of people. But in the back of their mind, they have a thought process that's unique to the group in which they reside. That's possible, right? And I think it's probable as well. So you have to be careful of understanding, just because something is written in code and just because it's automated, particularly from an artificial intelligence standpoint, doesn't mean it's unbiased. And the biases that exist, in the physical world are getting transferred into the digital world as well, right? Recommendation engines look at who you are and what your background is and what your ethnicity is, and then makes recommendations for you. It does the same thing no matter which group you're from, because it knows all of your data basically, right? So all the biases that are embedded in humans now get embedded into software, and that's a real problem. Could be a real problem. But I do think it also, at scale, it's going to eliminate a lot of jobs. But automation has always done this, right? So during the Industrial Revolution, people that came off of farms came into, came into factories, and a whole bunch of farm jobs were eliminated because of that, right? Because farms got automated. But those people found other jobs inside of car factories and other kind of manufacturing plants. And as those things went away, people became software engineers and, all that other kind of stuff as well. I think humans will find a way to get other jobs, but at some point, software is going to take over and automation is going to take over. And it all gets back to the same thing to me. What are we going to do with all those people that don't have work? Unless we want a world that has like half the population. There are people out there, and I don't subscribe to this, but there are people out there who ask, do we really need 7 billion people on the planet? Right? And that's a scary thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
But can I just address one other thing?
yes, definitely.
I told you this morning I took a taxi, right,
Mm-hmm.
to this office. And while I was waiting to get my taxi, a few buses went by, and hundreds of other cars went by. But what happens when full automotive automation happens? when cars can just drive themselves and buses can drive themselves. And there are just mini pods driving around the city, automated bases with no drivers necessary, fully automated by software and hardware embedded into the streets, right? Who's going to get paid for that? Just think about a scenario where the only people that own cars are, like today, the only people that own horses, very wealthy people. Because for individuals, they're not necessary, right? I mean, imagine a situation where transport is completely automated, right? And I can call a car at will on my phone, not like an Uber with a driver, not like a Grab with a driver, not like an Ola with a driver, but just the car comes. If I'm wealthy, I should buy 10 cars, one for me, 9 for people that can't afford one, and that 9 during the day just accrue interest to me and money to me because people can pay in little bits and pieces, micropayments to use my car, right? So that's another one of the risks that you're running here. But then also think about what that automation does to auto insurance, which is mandatory in every country. Because the number one cause of accidents in cars is not the car itself, it's the human in the car.
Absolutely.
You have to think of all these second order impacts of automation. It's not just that people may be out of a job. It's that even existing industries may have to transform because they're not sure who's going to buy that auto insurance anymore. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. And all other aspects which are related to the cars and drivings, for example, the driver's license, I think all the operations related to that will be affected too. So it's a whole bunch of different aspects while we should consider while talking about automation.
Yeah, and I mean, look, automation as well. What's it going to do to the oil industry? I think we may have talked about this. Was it you and I that spoke about this yesterday offline? I can't remember. But if Toyota and BMW are committed to following Tesla in the electrification of all their cars, I mean, Tesla's already done it, obviously, but these big car companies are committed to doing this by what, 2030? If you talk to your parents and say by 2030, in your parents' mind, because they've been alive for much longer than you have, they just think, wow, that's really far away. Because when they were little kids, 2030 was deep into the future. It's not that far away, right? And in 10 years, what is the oil industry going to do? Because most of the oil that gets used, or a lot of the oil that gets used in the global economy, is in automobiles. Absolutely. What's the impact of that? Go ahead.
So in terms of the like the oil industry you're talking about, I would like to give the example of Norway and how they have the highest number of Teslas in the world and how they're using electricity to run cars on the road. So just to talk about for a minute about this. So Norway has this fund called the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is funded by oil. So Norway, being a very resourceful country, they export the oil, and with the fund, they subsidize the people who buy electricity cars, for example, giving them free parking and no registration fee and stuff like that.
I'm listening. Go ahead. I just want to find something out. So Norges Bank.
So Norges Bank manages over $1 trillion of assets. They run a massively diversified portfolio, and as an entity, they've been very forward-thinking. Unlike some of the other sovereign wealth funds in the world that and some of the other oil-producing countries, Norway's an interesting place, right? Because, like you said, they give incentives that seem to be counterproductive to their own economy. But the idea is that they know that the future of oil is going to go away. So what else can they have? They're some of the largest shareholders in some of the most successful companies globally. And we used to see them trade, like I said, when I was with Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, on the portfolio trading desks. They run highly diversified global portfolios because they know that their oil revenues are going to go away at some point. And they don't want to be in a situation where their economy goes down because they no longer have oil money. But Norway is also one of the most innovative countries in the world when it comes to technology and gaming and stuff like that. And they've done a really good job of doing this. And if you meet and talk to the people at Norges Bank, which I have, they're very committed to this sort of portfolio diversification and to growing their economy, but also supporting their people in a way that is different than what most of these other countries with oil do. I'm impressed, actually.
Right.
But remember, it's easy, right? It's easier in relative terms for Norway to do this because their population is small in relative terms. right? And their population is not that diverse either. So it's just easier to make decisions like this, right? That's not ideal, but they do the best they can, I think, in the context that they have.
Right, and I think now the countries are realizing the oil wealth is not forever, and it is going to go away some point of view, be it due to technology or due to any other factor. It is definitely going to be washed out in the coming time.
Yeah, I mean, look at one of the things that Tesla has done is it's accelerated battery innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, think about it. If you're sitting around with your friends today and you're thinking about what you're going to study in university, it's like electrical engineering, or I want to make microchips, or I want to send people just into space, but no one's sitting around going, I want to be the lady who revolutionizes batteries. Have you ever heard somebody say that? Never. And battery technology has not made advancements for decades. But now Tesla's going, if everything's going to be electric, we've got to figure out a way to power those batteries and make them renewable in a way that's much faster and lasts longer. People haven't really done that for the longest time. But once we figure that out, and who knows what a battery really means going forward, right? Is it solar powered? Like, we don't know any of this yet. But there's going to be a ton of innovation, I think, in the battery space. A lot of it driven by electric cars, but I mean, there could be electric submarines. There could be electric everything. Yeah.
Right. I was also in the past month reading about the cars that are fueled by water.
How's that going to work? Were you breaking down the hydrogen and oxygen into what? Nuclear power? I don't know how that's going to work. But I have read stuff about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's done yet either.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, let's go back to cars, right? Does your family have a car?
Yes.
How many?
One,
right? But think about it. If you live in a city like Bangkok, at some point you're not going to need a car, because you could literally get a pod,
mm-hmm.
a tiny moving vehicle with all the conveniences that you need as an individual or as a group. You can get a multi-person pod, right? They can drive around. It eliminates traffic because it's moving at the same speed constantly. There are no accidents. People aren't randomly changing lanes. The buses have their own lane. Why would you spend the money on a car?
Absolutely.
At any level, right? If you can just hail one and you never have to maintain it, somebody else pays for it, and it's so reasonably priced. Yeah, I think people are missing what's going to happen in the automobile space. I really do. I think in a way it's going to end up like horses are, where only really rich people have them and enthusiasts have them, and regular people don't need them and don't want them.
Definitely. The consumer perspective is going to change in multiple ways in the near future. And
absolutely.
So now turning this podcast to talking about your personal life and some of the life lessons that you've got. So my question to you would be, what is the best advice you've ever got, be it in personal life or professional life, which you would like to share with us?
Yeah, so it wasn't given to me directly, and this is really hard to do, and I'm not an expert at it. But I do think that Ray Dalio's concept of radical transparency, and if you haven't read his book, Principles in Life and Work, you definitely should. And I would recommend it to everybody. I make no money from that. But this idea of radical transparency, I always say, you don't have to be a jerk to be smart. But what you do have to be is transparent, because humans are bad guessers. And if you really want to have a robust business relationship or a robust personal relationship with anybody, you have to be transparent about what you're thinking. And it's hard to do. It's uncomfortable to do. But I think it's really necessary. And I think your most successful people in their personal relationships and in their business relationships, again, it's not about being mean, right? You don't have to be a jerk to be smart. This is something that I figured out over time, right? But what you do have to be is be transparent. Because if you leave it up to people to guess, right? If you don't give people context, if you're not smart enough to say exactly what you're thinking and not confident enough to do that, you're going to fall flat on your face, because your friends aren't going to understand you. Your business partners aren't going to understand you. At some point, they're just going to walk away and try to figure out how to work with somebody who's more transparent than you. And that's hard work. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. So how do you differentiate, for example, if I say something which is going on in my mind, and sometimes it may come off a little bit mean or rude. So how do you categorize that, or how do you differentiate that?
Again, and this is something that that my father taught me. It's not what you say that matters. It's how you say it.
Definitely
Right?
makes sense.
You can think about a ton of things that you can say that can come out sounding really mean, or can come out sounding really supportive, even just depending on your tone of voice. And I won't give examples here because I'm not an actor, but you have to consider the way you're speaking. We said really early in this conversation that words matter, but tone matters as well, right?
Absolutely.
And just a really simple thing like, I love pizza, or I love pizza. It's like a completely different statement. And you have to consider this when you're saying something. And radical transparency can be something like this: I really don't want to work with you anymore. Or, I really do not want to work with you ever. You know what I mean? It's just a different statement. And you can be transparent and say, like, you're not living up to your potential. What's wrong with that? You know it, right? When someone says something to you that's critical, you know it already. And the reason why you're put off by it is because you're like, I don't want to hear this. And humans are like that, right? Yeah, I know I'm like that at some level.
Yeah, definitely. We want to hear what we really want to hear. So we want the person to say what we want to hear.
But I mean, again, imagine if you lived in a world where everybody was radically transparent. There was this bar in New York, and I don't know if this is actually true or not, if I just heard this, but but there was this story. I think this was really true. There was this bar in New York for a short period of time. And when you walked in, you got a piece of chalk and a chalkboard, a little mini chalkboard. And the idea was if you're in the bar, you had to write down exactly what you were thinking. And that everybody in the bar had to do it. Obviously they wanted to eliminate like racist comments and stuff like that, but people are in a bar to like meet people and hook up and stuff like that. So the idea was you'd write down, I think you're cute, and you'd have to like show it. This is the kind of radical transparency that if you live with this your whole life, then when somebody says something to you that is negative about you or that's critical, you're not put off by it because you're used to it. The problem is that we're so unused to criticism. And frankly, we're unused to flattery as well. That's why people get embarrassed. Like if I said to somebody, you look beautiful today, they'll blush because they're just not used to it. So all these things, if you can create this idea of radical transparency, then I think you're doing something really well.
Absolutely. So what would be your message to all the aspiring leaders and the people who are struggling in the tough times making a mark for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, real success is just driven by persistence and never giving up, right? Go back to some of the most successful people and maybe too successful, but look at Amazon, right? When Jeff Bezos started, he was not the only e-commerce company, right? When Microsoft started, they were not the only software development company, but these people just never gave up. And it's hard. They weren't always really successful, and they weren't always the darlings of their industries either. And it takes a long time. Here's the thing as well. The one thing you really have to think about is there's no such thing as an overnight success.
Right.
Even if you see somebody and you hear these like fantastical stories, right? Lisa built this company and 11 months later sold it for $100 million. That's all you hear. But what you don't hear is that in the previous 7 years, she had tried to build 6 other companies, all of which failed, and she was living in a car at her mother's house because she was broke. But all the stuff that she learned and that she didn't give up about helped build that 7th company, and that one was successful. And I think that it doesn't matter how old you are either. You just can't give up. You can't live a life of giving up. You just have to keep trying. And I think that for people that are struggling, you have to do 2 things. One is learn how to lean on the people that really care about you, because you'll let them lean on you when they're down. Thank them profusely and just never give up. Because once you give up, it's over.
Beautifully. So fail often, fail gracefully.
Yeah, it's not so much, you're not trying to fail, but you will fail. And if you
Absolutely.
do, look, we used to say this, back in the 1970s, when you learn how to ride a bicycle, you're going to fall. But if you never got back on the bicycle after the first time you fell, you'd never learn how to ride a bike. Riding a bicycle is not that hard, but it's scary at first and it hurts when you fall, but just get back up and do it again. It's the same concept, I think.
Right. So I heard this in a TED talk which said failure is not the opposite of success, but an inevitable part of success.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fancy way to say the same thing, right? Yeah, it's definitely not the opposite. And then but what actually is failure? I mean, we can have a much longer conversation is how do you define failure? If you talk to really smart people, what they'll do is when you say words like that, they'll stop you and say, okay, but what's your definition of success? Right? So that's the question to the person who gave the TED talk. Because if your definition of success is just having a ton of money and your definition of failure is being broke, then failure is definitely the opposite of success, right? But if your idea of success is being able to have impact and give back to the community while also making a profit, and your definition of failure is not being able to give back to the community and generate a profit, then sure, it's the exact opposite. I understand what they're saying, but definitions matter as well.
So this
Yeah.
also brings me to a story I often recite, which happened with me when I was a child. So my dad always used to ask me by the weekend, "What did you fail at today? Fail at this week?" So I used to be so annoyed. Why is he even asking me that question? Does he want me to fail? So, and over a period of time, my dad told me that if you've not tried anything new or you've not failed at anything, it actually means you had a monotonous week.
Yeah.
So I,
Yeah.
I got that, and whenever I used to fail at anything or try something new, I used to go running to my dad. Dad, I failed at this thing.
Your dad sounds like he's brilliant. My grandfather used to ask me, "What did you learn today?"
Um, in this
No,
podcast,
that's no. My grandfather used to ask me that question, and in a way, it's like what your dad was doing, right? But my
right.
grandfather just used a different question. Michael, what did you learn today?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you say nothing, it means you did nothing.
Right.
Same thing. Anyway,
So on that note, I would like to thank you for the time and thank you for the great insights and perspective you offered in this podcast. And I'm
it's my pleasure.
definitely pretty sure that this would add great insights and values to anyone who's listening to this.
I hope you had fun.
I had great fun. I had a great time recording this.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for your patience.